Good morning. I'm Quentin de Hulst, Director of Green Welfare Buildings at the European Copper Institute, and I'm very glad to welcome you to our third EPBD debate. The EPBD, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, sets the framework to achieve a zero-emission building stock. We have scheduled 4 debates on the road to the zero-emission building stock to explore the challenge from different angles. A few weeks ago, we had our first debate with MEP Morten Helveg Petersen about the importance of energy efficiency first. Our second debate was with MEP Sean Kelly to discuss skills and the importance of electrical installations. You can find the recordings of both debates via our website. And today, together with MEP Karen Cuff, we will take the angle of the energy system and discuss how zero-emission buildings contribute to this zero-emission energy system. Our final debate will discuss the perspective of consumers. It will be with MEP Marcos Ros-Sempere on June 21st. More information on our website, and you will also have the direct registration link in the chat. So today, I'm very pleased to welcome Karen Cuff, the rapporteur on the Energy Performance Buildings Directive, Irish member of the European Parliament for the Greens. With his team, he's currently working on the draft report that he will soon present to the ITRE committee. So Karen, welcome. We will discuss the new roles zero-emission buildings are taking into the energy system. Buildings become highly energy efficient. They can produce and store energy. They can offer charging points for e-mobility. It's a radical change of paradigm, and this will be explained by Marangiola Fabri, Head of Research at BPIE, Building Performance Institute Europe. Welcome, Marangiola. We will then discuss our presentation and the impact on the EPBD together with Karen Cuff and our other panelists. We have Naomi Chevillard, Head of Regulatory Affairs at Solar Power Europe. She will certainly have a lot to say about PV on buildings. She's replacing in the last minute our CEO who was announced on our program. Thank you, Naomi, for taking over and joining us. And last but not least, we have Luca de Breukere, Program Manager at ECOS, the well-known NGO advocating for environmentally friendly technical standards, policies and laws. And Luca is particularly working on e-mobility and the necessary charging infrastructure. This is also addressed by the EPBD. And now, before to start our debate with our panelists and the audience, so I remind you that you can put questions into the Q&A that we will take at the end. You can also upvote questions of other participants. But now I give the floor to Marangiola Fabri to set the scene via a short presentation, and then we will come back for the discussion, starting with reaction of Karen Cuff. So Marangiola, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Quentin. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. As announced, I'm just going to give a small presentation, and I'm going to share my screen so that you can actually see what I'm talking about. I hope you can see my
perfect.
screen. Yeah. Please let me know. Perfect. Thank you very much. So smart buildings in decarbonised energy systems. BPIE, for those who don't know, is a think tank who is focusing its research on buildings performance, and that's always been our starting point. And a few years ago, we started wondering what a smart building means and what a smart building is in a smart building environment would mean for the energy system. And we do, we see the shift of paradigm that you mentioned about buildings becoming part of micro energy hubs in a bigger energy system. But we started, we delivered, and we started really looking into this topic from the question of what is a smart building. So the first thing that comes to our mind is usually building that is intelligent and user-friendly. But in reality, there is so much more behind a smart building. And what we consider smart building are buildings that are highly efficient and that allow really an exchange between the unit, the single building, and the environment around it in terms of exchange with the energy grid, but also the ability of the buildings to be flexible in how the energy it is used. So about 4 years ago, we did a series called Smart Buildings in a Decarbonised Energy System, and a follow-up study trying to understand whether Europe was ready for a smart building revolution. And I'm referring to these studies for two main reasons. One is that the principles behind a smart building and a decarbonized energy systems have not changed. They've remained the same. And the second is that we have not been able to update our study of whether the Europe is smart ready. So it would be really interesting to see in maybe a year from now, when the Fit for 55 package would be adopted, how that has changed the ability and the readiness of the European countries to really create a smart energy system where buildings are a central part of it. Out of these 10 principles that I'm going to show you in a minute, there is one that is really considered the first and foremost. It's a prerequisite for a smart building, and it's energy efficiency, and in the sense that smart buildings must be highly performing in terms of their energy consumption. All the other principles are important, taken separately, but they're obviously considered most effective when they are brought together and whether they are really interconnected. So you can see here these 10 principles. I'm not going to mention them all, but I'm just going to mention a few. As I mentioned, the first one is really maximizing the buildings. Energy efficiency is the first necessary step, increasing renewable energy and stimulation of energy storage capacities in the building, empowering end users via smart meters and controls, creating a building infrastructure to drive further market uptake of electric vehicles. So as you can see, it really, these 10 principles covered every angle that should be taken into account when we think about a smart building and how they really can contribute to a decarbonized energy system. And the answer to our question, was Europe ready for a smart building revolution, was not surprisingly not that positive. Back then, there were only a handful of member states that had some of the criteria that we had identified as being ready to really take up this change and to implement the shift in paradigm. But the majority were not ready to actually implementing this. The idea of a smart building as in a decarbonized energy system, and in here, what we really want to understand is seeing how the building works in a smart built environment, and what are the 5 main elements that are necessary to be regulated and to be transformed, both in terms of market offer and knowledge and understanding from the point of view of the building owners and the building occupants, are 5 main elements. So a smart built environment where the smart buildings operate, it's an environment that it's efficient and healthy. So this really looks at how the users and the occupants can be comfortable in their building. A dynamic operability, so the ability of the building to install and use a number of technologies that allow a control of and a better use of its demand and a better heating and cooling system, a responsive energy system through storage and demand response, and renewable energy uptake and dynamic and self-learning control system. All of these are essential elements to make sure that we get to a smart energy building. I want to just take a step back to bring this study to the reality of today and just zoom into the importance of having efficiency, highly efficient buildings as the starting point. We've recently done a study looking at how much final energy could be saved and natural gas could be saved if we just improve the insulation of roof and walls in 8 member states. And so just looking at the space heating in buildings, we can really see how much energy can be saved and how much natural gas can be saved, which today it's even more relevant that when we started looking at the notion of smart buildings a few years back. So this is really just making sure that we do not forget that the first and most important element is to make sure that we stop wasting energy and that we provide a setting and an environment where the building stock can be adapted and can be changed. And now is the time. In terms of the importance of the EPBD and the Fit for 55 package, it is absolutely important to look at what needs to be changed from a regulatory perspective to make sure that we can enable the market transformation that is necessary, so that when in 2 years we're going to do an update of these Europe's Ready for the Smart Ready revolution, there are changes that have happened, and we can see an improvement in how member states can actually adapt to this paradigm shift. So highly efficient building stock enables demand response and increase a share of variable renewable energy in total energy consumption. And these 3 elements go hand in hand. So while it is absolutely essential that the EPBD, and I'm appealing to Kieran here, provides some of the provisions that facilitates and require that change, it's equally important that other parts of the Fit for 55 package provide and guarantee a greater share of renewable energy and the other market conditions that are needed to deploy this potential. Today, in comparison to 2018, when the Clean Energy Package was adopted and the EPBD was revised, there are multiple ways and new ways through which we can provide renewable energy to the grid on site. And this is fully in the end of what the EPBD can do through the energy communities, through smart grid, smart district to the grids. It is really important to understand that we are looking at a systemic change, and the EPBD is at the core of the changes that the first steps that need to be taken to allow the deployment of smart buildings at a larger share. The right to an efficient and affordable buildings is also equally important. A smart building in a smart built environment, it's a building that actually recognizes, predicts, and responds to the needs of its occupants and provides the level of comfort and affordability that we have seen are becoming more and more relevant after 2 years of pandemic and the situation that we're seeing now as the result and the effects in our ability to afford comfort and warmth in our buildings caused by the Ukrainian war. It is absolutely necessary. So whatever we do when thinking about changing and amending and improving the EPBD to allow the deployment of smart buildings, we really have to remember that the performance, indoor quality, and the ability to keep comfortable levels are vital characteristics for a smart buildings. It's not only about technologies that are installed, it's about how these technologies can be used by the users, by all type of users, and what is the added value that these technologies can bring to the table. And my last point, as I just mentioned, the Fit for 55, of which the Energy Performance of Building Directive is a core element, not just, as some have mentioned or might have hinted at in the past, not just an accessory, something that we can fix after all the other pieces of legislation have been established. are absolutely the central opportunity to create the framework so that we can trigger the investments and the market transformation through a change in the regulatory landscape that are necessary to make sure that we meet the 2030 and 2050 targets, and we actually see this paradigm shift towards a building that is a passive element in the energy systems toward an active contributor to grid flexibility and a better use of the energy and then in a decarbonized system. I thank you for your time. All our publications are available. Everything I mentioned is available on our website, and I will stay with you for the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariangela, for this very good presentation. It's clear that a highly energy efficient building stock enables demand response and increasing share of renewable. I think it's also worth noting that reducing the peak demand contributes to reduce the energy price for everyone. And so every time we can save energy, reduce peak demand, it reduces the energy price, and it's particularly important in the current context. So I will now turn to Keren Kaf. So Keren, I would like to invite you to share your first thoughts on the role of buildings into the energy system, the importance of the EPBD on which you are working right now. I would like to start with a specific question. When discussing energy policies in general, do you think that buildings are sufficiently acknowledged as an energy infrastructure?
Good question. Look, I think at some levels they are, and in some member states they are. But the challenge that I have is trying to work with 27 member states and MEPs from these member states in upping our ambition all across the file. You know, revising a directive or writing European law, it's a bit like teaching a class of 27 unruly children. And there are some students who are hanging on to every word, really enthusiastic, really interested in what you're doing. And unfortunately, there are some students who have other concerns on their mind. Maybe there's trouble at home, maybe there's parents who are absent, or maybe they simply don't have the ability to get to class on time. And while, Quentin, I absolutely agree with what you are saying and what Mariangela is talking to us about this, I think many people do realize the extraordinary role of buildings in tackling climate change, in acting as energy storage devices and their potential to help balance the grid. But I think for many people simply have other concerns on their mind. I don't mean to diminish what you are suggesting there, but I absolutely believe that buildings are part of the energy system and we need to do more with them. But I think a lot will come down to the individual member states within their national building renovation strategies and what they can do there. And look, for me as a legislator, two things are very important. Minimum energy performance standards, the so-called MEPS, and hopefully we can get a progressive agreement on that across the line. And then the issue of proper funding. As we all know, the renovation of our buildings, 80% of which will still be around in 2050, is a massive undertaking. It's probably a 100 trillion euro project. So releasing the funding is crucial. And anything we can do to work with the European Investment Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and then all the other European instruments on cohesion funds, structural funds, and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. If we can unblock that log jam to open up funding for renovations and for deep renovations, then I think we will be successful.
Thank you, Keren, for these first thoughts. Indeed, very important and interesting. And when we While looking at the 10 principles highlighted by Marianne, you could also see indeed that each of these principles is an investment, and that can be a challenge. And one of these investment is the on-site renewable energy production, and that's something particularly important for Solar Power Europe, represented by Naomi. So Naomi, what role do you see for solar PV in a decarbonized energy system, and then particularly on buildings, and maybe some reflections about this challenge of financing?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but first of all, thanks for the invitation. It's very nice to be here and discuss this important topic. Well, solar PV in the decarbonized energy system, it will be very important. The first reason is for the costs. It's been several years now that solar PV is the cost of electricity of solar PV is well below fossil equivalents. Now, what you also see is that solar and storage cost is well below gas peakers. So for flexibility, solar and storage is also less expensive than fossil flexibility sources. Another reason is scalability of solar PV. We can do and we'll need solar fields, but we also can also put solar on roofs, on cars, etc., which makes solar PV an important part of the future electricity system. It's also said by other organizations. The IEA said that we should have solar PV being the first electricity capacity in Europe by 2025, and the ambition that the Commission put forward in the REPowerEU package also show the role that solar PV will take in the future. Now, out of this big solar PV capacity that we'll need, rooftops are going to be an important part. There is a huge potential for solar PV on rooftops. Maybe it's not, we're often compared with our wind colleague who install on fields, but actually when you look at the solar market, today 3/4 of the capacity is on rooftop. Half of the market today, so half of what we install every year is on rooftop. And in our scenario, if you want to reach renewable-based or 100% renewable energy system, we will have 2/3 of the 2/3 of the capacity being rooftop. So rooftop is really, really an important potential. From a grid perspective, it's also an important potential to have smart buildings that also actively integrate themselves into the grid, provide flexibility or matches the solar PV production with the consumption of new EVs, new heat pumps, etc. And so that's why the EPBD and renovation policies become so important now, also from an energy, not only from an energy efficiency purpose, but also from an energy generation and decarbonization objective, and that it's so important that the EPBD plans buildings that generate their own solar energy, and that's why we really welcome the solar mandate of the European Commission. There is more to be done, of course, but also that these buildings are smart and can integrate solar electricity well in the building and in the grid.
Thank you, Naomi. And you mentioned the flexibility with electric vehicle to complement PV, and that's something on which Luca is particularly working. So Luca, what's your view on the possible impact of e-mobility on buildings and the possible contribution of buildings on e-mobility?
Well, it's large on both ways. So we think buildings are very important just simply because most of the charging of electric vehicles will be done in buildings, at homes, offices, or supermarkets as well. So that's why more plugs are needed in buildings. So the EPBD is already today, and in the Commission's proposal, also setting requirements for charging stations to be installed, either this or pre-cabling. So that means that when you renovate or when you build a new house, that the cables are already there. So once somebody moves in and buys an electric car, that it's relatively easy to install a charging point. And we are very happy to see that. We do think that more can be done, because basically right now, the proposal of the Commission sets certain thresholds. It basically means non-residential buildings, they only need to install charging stations or pre-cabling as of 5 parking spaces. But it means that when a building is built or renovated and there are 4 parking spaces, that nothing needs to be done. And we think that that's a missed opportunity. For the residential buildings, it's as of 3. We also think that this should be lower because basically we need charging points everywhere. So, and then obviously very important is also the existing buildings, because most of the buildings, they will still be in place in 2050 and they may not be renovated anytime soon. So it basically means that there's still a very large housing stock that with the new rules, as they are set by the Commission or proposed by the Commission now, that they would basically not be tackled and that no pre-cabling or no charging station would be installed. So yeah, there's still room for improvement. Of course, so this is what buildings can do for e-mobility, but then there's also the other way around, what cars, electric vehicles can do for buildings. And then we talk about flexibility, obviously, because cars, they are basically batteries on wheels. It means that when you charge your car, this can be synced with your renewable energy production in case you have PV panels on your roof. And of course, that means that you truly drive renewable. And that's one of the advantages of a car. Then a car can also, through smart charging, you can postpone the charging, you can make sure, or you can slow the charging so that the charging is basically done when there is less need of energy for other uses. And this basically, this avoids energy peaks. So that's essential as well. There are other advantages, grid services. You can basically, the car can actually provide frequency response, that is called. So you can basically it's a service to the grid, so that now with the many distributed energy resources that are coming onto the grid, there is a need for this stabilizing factor, and a car can do that. And then lastly, now the technology is also being developed to basically return energy from your car battery to a building or to the grid. And also this is very important because it basically means that you can store your renewable energy and then use it for even something else than driving. So yeah.
And this is foreseen in the EPBD by requiring to have smart chargers.
Exactly, and that's very important.
But only for the one that are required according to the threshold that you mentioned.
Exactly.
And so it might also be something to improve. So you mentioned the threshold, the existing buildings, the importance of smart charging. So these are your recommendations for the EPBD. Marie-Angela, do you have other specific recommendations for the EPBD that you would like to raise to Karen?
But in relation to smart buildings, I think the most important ones are actually the two that he mentioned, just to make sure that we do have a largest number of buildings that will be renovated before 2050. So that would also help what Luca just mentioned, just making sure that the different thresholds and the entire system can adjust to that, because some of the provisions regarding e-mobility or smart buildings can only work if we have the opportunity to renovate deeply and as fast as possible a large part of our building stock. It also relates to what Naomi was saying about rooftop solar constituting 2/3 of the capacity. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with someone who has solar PV, and he said I should redo my roof, but if I redo it now, I have to uninstall my solar PV. It's going to be more expensive because I will not be able to keep enjoying the tariff that I have, and there is a risk that my system will be damaged. I think that is exactly the type of situations that we have to think of when making changes to the EPBD and the connected pieces of legislation. I'm trying to understand what is the systemic change that it's necessary so that one provision reinforces another rather than one provision hampers other benefits. So ideally would have a system when before installing a solar PV, we make a check and we understand whether there is the opportunity to actually do part of the renovation and so that we do them at once. And
should the renovation passport answer this question?
It would certainly, the building renovation passport would certainly help. And I think it should really identify these opportunities. I think the renovation passport in conjunction, I think, with this idea of identifying the trigger points when an action is necessary, and at that point having a passport that can actually provide the solutions. It can be when I want to install a solar PV, then I have a passport that actually show me that it would make much more sense if at the same time I would do other interventions. And if there were a financial instrument to support then that increase investment, that would be the ideal situation, but can also be the other way around. I already have a solar PV installed on my roof. It's time to change it. Perfect opportunity to actually make an assessment and to see what else can be done while I have my roof free, and that might be the perfect opportunity to redo it.
Yeah, thank you. Karen, do you want to react on any of the points raised? With already a lot of ideas for the EPBD.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting challenges over the last few weeks, obviously the awful tragedy unfolding in Ukraine has changed energy policy in Europe. And the European response of the Repower EU clearly feeds into the EPBD. And I think the Repower EU called for a new Article 9A on solar energy in buildings. So that puts an obligation on member states to ensure new buildings are solar ready. And I'm hoping to expand on this article by accelerating the rollout of solar capabilities in buildings as soon as possible. And then obviously, I also want to include the Commission proposal to roll out 10 million heat pumps by 2030. But the point about the challenge of different works at different times and maybe work being needed on a roof that has solar on it, this makes a compelling case for deep renovations at the outset so that you don't have to go back, take off the solar panels, fix the roof, and then put the panels back on. So wherever we can, we want to incentivize deep renovations that prepare a building for the next 22 to 30 years. But obviously we have to strike a balance between the available finance and what can be achieved. But I think there is an extraordinary opportunity to integrate buildings and mobility. And we spoke a bit, the panelists have spoken a bit about the role of the vehicle in being connected to the building and being connected to the grid. And recently I visited a friend's new house, which is built to a passive house standard, which has solar PV on the roof, which has an electric car beside the building, and also battery storage within the building. And between the battery storage, the car battery, the PVs on the building, the low energy requirements of the building, essentially the building provides for between 10 and 15,000 kilometers per year for the vehicle. So the building is really a machine that works with the car to provide for the mobility needs of the occupants. And I think it is that kind of model that we should be looking towards in order to reduce our emissions and provide a comfortable life for those who live in new or upgraded buildings.
Thank you, Kieran. And what do you think specifically on the call of Luca to reduce the threshold for number of charging points?
Look, I want to get the numbers right on this. I would like to be very ambitious because from a very political perspective, I think other MEPs will not share my ambition and the council may not share my ambition. So I will try and be as ambitious as possible on this.
And the importance to make sure that all these charging points are smart so that we can have this integration.
Absolutely, bidirectional charging is important. Pre-cabling wherever we can, and certainly pre-ducting is crucial because this is moving so fast. I think it's a bit like the transition away from the horse to the motor vehicle 110 years ago. Something similar is happening in transport and mobility and in the buildings that we live in. So we have to ride the wave, surf the wave of that and be ahead rather than behind where people are and where technology is.
Yeah, a systemic change that has to happen quickly.
It absolutely is. And I think that is being accelerated by the crisis in Ukraine. And I think as Rahm Emanuel says, a crisis is also an opportunity. And I certainly think this is an opportunity to wean ourselves off fossil fuels and accelerate the solar revolution.
Thank you. Naomi, you hear also strong support for solar rooftop. Do you have specific ask or specific recommendation in the EPBD to go maybe beyond what Report EU is proposing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can only echo what just said. I think there is, I think it's a bit difficult to justify technology-specific mandates. But here, I think what we just discussed shows that it really makes a lot of sense because we cannot only rely on, having incentives to install solar PV and then a consumer taking that decision one day because, I don't know, it's a year he wants to invest and there is a bit of a trend or a support scheme and then it doesn't, and then 2 years later it has to do a bigger renovation and then it doesn't make sense. So I think there is a lot of sense to push this effort of installing solar PV to the construction industry, to the renovation experts, and have it thought all together. Also because we also see new technologies, new building materials like tiles or glass, which integrate already solar PV cells, and there could be also synergies to exploit there. And again, altogether, it's also good, I think, for the consumer because, as Kieran said, a student or a citizen doesn't necessarily think about all of that. We recently talked with our Italian Solar Association, who was explaining that they were in discussion with Italian SMEs. Italian SMEs are fully pro-renewables, but they do not want to think about installing solar PV on the roof and connecting everything. I mean, we also have to make it easier for consumers, for businesses to install solar PV. What we propose, therefore, is to be as ambitious as possible on those solar mandates, have them starting as early as possible and much earlier than what the Commission proposed. I think really we should be as ambitious as possible because there will always be a case where it doesn't make sense. For example, a building is in the shade of another building, but there is a lot of cases where it still makes sense, and we should be really careful not to create any loopholes. So I think, yeah, mandate on all buildings as early as possible is important. In parallel, I think, so unfortunately, the building stock is not renovated as fast as we would. So there could be a reflection, I mean, an obligation for member states to have an objective on how they install solar PV on existing buildings, maybe outside of renovations. We've seen in the national energy and climate plans, a number of states, I think Luxembourg, Spain, France, Austria, having objectives for solar PV deployment on their rooftops, even outside of renovations. Why not? It's also a nationally driven objective, and there could be synergies to exploit there. And then just a quick reflection on grid integration and flexibility. We also really believe to these models, solar PV with smart charging, solar PV with storage. And it's important to install the right technologies in the buildings, but what is always missing is the signal from the grid. The grid operators today are not providing the right frameworks for consumers to offer the flexibility. So it could be flexible grid tariffs, like day-night grid tariffs, as we had in my country, France, or it could be even markets for different consumers, and we don't have these markets. So then you can install something as smart as you want in a building if there is no possibility to offer your flexibility. And that the TSO still curtails another generation when there is constraint in the grid. It's that efficient. So somehow we also have to make sure that grid operators provide the right frameworks to use this flexibility. And here, an important element is really their remuneration incentives. Today, they're not compensated if they use flexibility from distributed energy generation. They're not incentivized to connect solar PV or heat pump more easily. So having something in the text of the EPBD in that regard would be important.
Thank you. So a lot of elements to consider beyond the buildings and just the solar obligation. One important element in the EPBD is also the definition of zero-emission building. And the proposed definition is requiring the low amount of energy still required, so energy efficiency first, of course. But this low amount to be fully covered by energy from renewable sources generated on site, so it can be PV, from a renewable energy community or from a district heating and cooling system. But is it actually compatible with the vision of buildings integrated into the energy system? Or does it mean buildings are energy islands? Because you can also have renewable energy coming from the grid. So should it be integrated into this zero-emission building definition? Anyone that would like to react on this?
Yeah, maybe if I could come in on that, Quentin.
Yep.
Zero-emission buildings are not supposed to be disconnected from the grid, but have to use more renewable energy produced on site from a renewable energy community, from district heating, than what they take from the grid on a net annual basis. And I think efficient heat pumps are one of the solutions to reduce emissions from heating and cooling in buildings. And then if you look at Annex 3 of the proposal, it said, where there are local limitations, the use of grid electricity is also allowed as an exception, as long as it complies with the national criteria. So for example, a zero-emission building could be a single-family house with an energy performance below the threshold in Annex 3, with a heat pump to cover its heating energy needs. And the electricity demand of the heat pump should also be covered by renewable energy produced on site. For example, by a rooftop solar PV or from a renewable energy community. However, the ambient heat coming from the heat pump could also be used as renewable energy produced on site. And if this house doesn't have access to on-site renewables, then it can draw electricity from the grid based on national criteria. So I don't believe that the criteria for a zero-emission building is overly strict, which is what some people are suggesting.
Okay, good. So you see electricity from the grid as something that would contribute, but as if all the rest is not there, that's a priority to on-site, etc.
Exactly.
Good. Any thoughts from Luca or Naomi or Marianchola on this specific point?
Maybe quickly on this, I think even before just drawing electricity from the grid, there are models where you draw renewable electricity from the grid, like collective self-consumption, sharing electricity in the neighborhood, or even renewable PPAs. Today, they're not so accessible to buildings, but they should be in the future. And then maybe just another thought. I mean, a building in self-consumption is not necessarily an energy island. Precisely because of this flexibility use, a building in self-consumption could also have a battery that provides a bit of service to the grid when the neighbor is charging the car and there is a bit of tension on the local network, or just contribute to system stability. So I don't think we're talking purely, even though the bulk of the consumption comes from on-site, there's still a connection to the grid.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. We have a question on something that we have discussed also in previous debates, that with PV, with EV charging, but also heat pumps mentioned by Karen, the electrical installations in buildings are becoming increasingly important, and they must be ready for all this electrification. So suggested in previous debates to have them considered as technical building system, and also that energy performance certificate should inform about the readiness of a building and its electrical installation to integrate PV, EV, heat pump, demand response, etc. Do you have any thoughts on this, Karen and the others?
Well, look, I agree that electric installations are becoming more important, and I think they will obviously have a role to play in boosting the energy efficiency of buildings. And we've tried to incorporate things like building automation and control systems within Article 11 so that they are covered under the provision for technical building systems. In terms of improving the mobility, I think that increasing the charging capacity of buildings is really important. And buildings have a role to play in the decarbonisation of the transport sector by providing charging for EVs and flexibility to power grids. And they also don't only consume energy, but they can produce it as well with solar panels. So that would be my thoughts.
Thank you, Karen. Anyone else would like to say something on this?
If I may, yeah. I think it is important to plan ahead and think ahead of what would be the changes that are needed to make a building or groups of buildings, because I think we will eventually also move behind the individual buildings to neighborhoods. A group of buildings can actually contribute to the flexibility and the decarbonization of the energy system. But it's to make sure that we know what will be needed when we need to make that change, that when we need to make the deep renovation and all those changes and interventions on buildings, where and what is the right instrument to collect that information. It's a difficult question. I think I would tend to think we did not do any research on this in terms of the feasibility and in terms of how easily it would be for the users to actually understand it. But I personally think that including that information into a building renovation passport might be easier than doing it through an energy performance certificate, because, well, they definitely need to be updated and changed, but we cannot put every information about a building on the energy performance certificate. It will risk a counter effect, so that it will not actually be able to guide any decision. The building renovation passport seems a better instrument, an instrument to do that. But there is a point that I think it's really important to highlight, is that no matter what we put into the regulation, we need to make sure that those who are actually going to develop a building renovation passport and release an energy performance certificate understand and can provide that information, and that information is passed on. It's just not the instrument as such. And that goes back to making sure that it's beside and a bit about behind what the EPBD can do as such, but it's reconnected to REPowerEU, just making sure that we have the knowledge and the upskills of the trades that are actually working around our buildings to make sure that they understand the importance of these changes and they implement them. And then they can pass the information on to whoever makes the decision about renovating, because that's absolutely essential. There's nothing, I think, more counterproductive than being ready to do a deep renovation and then understanding that there are unforeseen circumstances and lock-ins and obstacles that require extra work, extra time, extra investment, just because it was not thought out at the very beginning.
Yeah, thank you, Mariangela. Looking at the other questions from the audience, next question is maybe for Naomi. Would it make sense that the solar PV panels would become the roof covering, replacing the roof tiles with PV panels? And then the same participant says that the other problem is that you are limited to the amount of solar PV you can put on a roof due to the grid and planning restriction. And also then solar PV on the roof won't provide 60 kilowatt-hour for an EV. Naomi, quickly on this question.
So on the possibility to have roof tiles, yeah, there's a lot of innovations, especially in Europe. We have a French member, Acquo, for example, who produces solar tiles. They will equip the French pavilion to the next international exhibition in Dubai. So there are interesting technologies if you're interested in architecture, and there are a lot of solutions. Grid and planning restrictions, I think. Permitting restrictions, I think we're okay. In a lot of countries, you have exemptions from construction permits on the roof, not in all countries, so we're working on that. Grid, indeed, it's an issue. The example issue is the Netherlands, where half of the grid or 3/4 of the grids are blocked for the connection of new PV because of the thing I was just discussing. So that's why it's very important to address it in the EPBD. And finally, the capacity of solar PV, of course, it's not going to power, for example, to charge all of your vehicle. Although there are different cases. For example, if you're a single family that drives 10 kilometers per day, maybe it's going to be enough. But even if you're like an office building with 10 vehicles charging, we had cases of companies that install solar PV on the roof. It charged maybe 10% of the fleet, but still it allowed them to reduce the connection cost, because in the end their peak electricity demand was lower, so they could install let's say a smaller cable, so reduce the grid connection fee. So there are hundreds of cases where there could be benefits. It's up to the people and to regions to find them out.
Yeah. Good, thank you. And we have two other questions related to PV, so maybe very quickly on recycling, the cost of recycling solar PV, and on the possibilities of building integrated PV, so not just solar on rooftops.
Yes, so on recycling today, there is a scheme, but we have not reached yet the volumes where recycling is running at full speed. It will be the challenge for the next years, but there is already a scheme. Every manufacturer that installs solar PV in Europe has to pay a small fee to contribute to recycling, to the recycling industry. But again, the challenge is really in the next year and structuring the industry. And the other question, yes, BIPV. Again, so solar tile is part of BIPV, but BIPV, it's not only solar tile, it's solar glass, it's flexible solar that you put as curtains on the wall, etc. So there is a lot of potential, and I think the construction and the architectural industry can also play with all of these technologies for the buildings of tomorrow.
Thank you, Naomi. So time is flying. That's a very interesting discussion, but we need to go to some conclusions now. So I would first like to ask again our panelists to come with a very short conclusion sentence or last statement, a very important message. And we will finish with Karen, that can maybe also indicate a bit more where is the process and what is now expecting from stakeholders. So let's start with Mariangela, one very short conclusion, quick statement.
Yes, thanks. As Kira mentioned, I think the key and most important element to highlight for the EPBD and the development of this paradigm shift is to make sure that we can renovate as many buildings as fast and as deeply as possible And that will facilitate the rollout of a number of other technologies, whether it's heat pumps, solar PVs, electric charging, because that is the preliminary condition, the condition sine qua non, without which it would be very difficult to achieve the target of highly efficient and decarbonized building stock by 2050.
Fast, deep renovation and many renovation. Thank you. Luca?
I would definitely agree with what Mariangela just said. I would like to add that, yeah, I would say lower those thresholds for parking spaces so that we have as many charging stations as possible in buildings. And also it's something that I haven't actually touched upon before, but well, the right to plug. It is in a sense in the Commission's proposal. It basically means that it has to be a right to install a plug, that there's no one actually blocking you from doing that, your neighbor or anyone installing the grid connection. And so yeah, this is very important because it will obviously also ensure that existing buildings bit by bit get the plug that we need to actually accelerate electric mobility and also integrate all of that with the building and the grid.
Thank you, Luca. Naomi, last point.
Yeah, I mean, I think what this discussion showed is that having buildings as a sort of energy hub or smart energy hub is really the future. It can be also expanded to the neighborhood. We'll have energy neighborhood in the future. So really deploying smart and local energy generation is really a no regret option. And let's do it rather earlier to save some hassles to consumers so that they don't have to install it after doing the renovation. So let's be ambitious.
Thank you. Ambition, anticipation. That's the message. Karen, your key conclusions.
Yeah, interesting. We want the right to disconnect and we want the right to connect. It's going to get quite confusing, really, the right to plug and the right to switch off. But I think it is, joking apart, I think it is really important. Yes, the renovations, they need to be fast and deep, but they need to be financed and they need to be fair. And by that, I mean, we do need to focus on the finance and making that available. And we also need to ensure a just transition. And by that, I mean, we should try and concentrate in the first instance on those who are living in energy poverty and try and roll out deep renovations quickly to public housing and to those who are in poor quality homes who are at risk of fuel poverty, so our energy poverty. So I think that is an important aspect in all of this. Look, from my perspective, we're just finalizing my report at the moment. That has to be done in the next few days. The deadline for amendments is in early July. Our final shadows meeting will be, I think, the 11th of October, and we will have a vote on the ITRI committee in the week of the 26th to the 27th of October, and hopefully a vote in plenary in the December plenary session in Strasbourg. So things are moving quite quickly. I've been enthused by the level of interest so far. We have to remember that the EPBD is not the only instrument that will impact on the future of buildings. It also relates to the Renewable Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive, and of course the European Social Fund. So the connectivity between all of the Fit for 55 files is very important, and it's an issue that is taking up a lot of time from the European Commission's perspective. But look, I think the time is now, the time is right. I think there is a real opportunity to be ambitious. And I certainly am enjoying working with you to deliver this. And I think we can certainly deliver an ambitious file, an ambitious piece of legislation by the end of this year.
Thank you, Kiran. And I think everyone is really looking forward to see your draft report and to continue to work also to support it towards your colleagues and then also support your work towards the council. So thank you everyone for your participation to this debate. I would like to mention also that our next debate will touch the point of consumers mentioned by Karen as very important. So it will discuss this perspective with the consumer organization BUG and MEP Marcos Rossempere from SND with Shadow Rapporteur in Envy. We will also have Feeds, the Forum for Domestic Electrical Safety, Renovate Europe, and the Union of Property Owners, because property owners also have something to say there. So please join this next debate. All info is on our website, and you have the registration link also in the chat. So thank you everyone for your participation today and your contribution. And let's continue the discussion around the report as soon as we can see it, Karen, and good luck with it. Thank you everyone.
Very much.
Have a nice day.